Son of the Storm Dragon by Ashton K. 423. Ren Daisuke thought my unconventional life would end after years of working in special forces and CIA. So imagine my surprise when I died and reincarnated as a dragon of all things in this world, filled with magic and monsters. This is the story of my adventures in the greatest journey of all time, under the new name Rimuru Tempest.
Tensura AU.
Chapter 32. Angelus Arc. Pact of the Sky and Storm. A few hours ago, if someone had told Rimuru that a demon lord was going to turn to him for help, he probably would have scoffed. And yet here he was right now, seated with none other than Sky Queen Fry within the private reception room of the administrative building. The tension was thick enough that one could cut it with a knife. Rimuru sat comfortably on one of the plush velvet couches, swirling the contents of a small porcelain cup. The clear liquid sloshed gently against the white ceramic. It was a recent innovation of Tempest, a newly brewed batch of sake made from the sweet rice that Lorei had managed to successfully cultivate. The drink had a strong, yet sweet taste that buzzed in one's mouth, and its aroma was surprisingly soothing and floral. Across from him, Demon Lord Fry sat with impeccable posture, holding her own cup delicately, studying its contents. Despite her calm and dignified exterior, Rimuru was able to pick up on the currents of anxiety hidden within her through envy. She took a sip from her cup, her eyes widening a fraction at the rich flavor. A few more minutes passed, the two rulers sitting in silence, occasionally sipping their drinks. Both were taking the moment to think about their situations, how they wound up here, and the other person in the room. Deciding to end the silence, Fry set her cup down on the low wooden table between them before straightening her posture. "Please allow me to introduce myself once more," she began. "I am the Harpy Queen Fry, ruler of the Queendom of Fulbrosia. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I'd like to apologize once more for intruding on your domain uninvited." Rimuru set his own cup down, offering a polite, measured nod. "The pleasure is mine, Demon Lord Fry. And I accept your apology," Rimuru greeted, his voice calm and level. "As you already know, I am Rimuru Tempest, Chancellor of the Great Forest of Jura and leader of the Jura Tempest Federation." Fry offered a polite nod of acknowledgement, a part of her relieved that Rimuru was as reasonable as he seemed. Though he had not stated it, she was aware of his heritage as the Storm Dragon's offspring, having heard him declare so to the Orc Lord through Clayman's crystal ball. A part of her had worried he would take offense to her sudden appearance because of this. Then again, there's no way any unreasonable monster would have been able to build all this in the span of half a year, she mentally mused. Rimuru City's development had been far beyond what she expected from a fledgling nation less than a year old. The reports of this place didn't do it justice. "Now that we have properly acquainted ourselves, what is it that I can do for you, Fry?" Rimuru asked, his tone shifting from a polite host to that of a serious leader. Fry closed her eyes for a moment as she thought of her next words. As one of the 10 great demon lords, asking for help hurt her pride, and the information she was about to reveal was extremely sensitive to the security of her domain. But given the current situation she found herself in, there wouldn't be a domain to protect if she let pride and security dictate her actions. She would just have to hope Rimuru would not use this information against her in the future. "I came to you because my nation faces an unprecedented threat," Fry began as her features grew serious. "In my nation, there is a high priestess with the rare ability Future Sight. It allows her to receive visions that serve as interpretations of future events. These visions are few and far between and often appear symbolically, but they are almost never wrong. Yesterday, Teresa, my high priestess, collapsed from her latest divination." Fry continued after a deep breath and a sigh. "What she saw was enough to physically and mentally harm her." Rimuru leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees as he gave Fry his full attention. He understood how much trust Fry was putting in him right now. She was essentially casting aside her pride and revealing sensitive information regarding one of her nation's most valuable assets. He wordlessly encouraged her to continue. In her vision, Teresa saw the sky shatter, and from the heavens descended beings clad in white and gold armor, multiple radiant white wings sprouting from their backs. They descended and attacked my capital Jia, Fry explained as she clenched the hands in her lap into fists. And from the sea of clouds beneath our city rose numerous shark-like beasts, swimming through the air as though they were in water. At their center was a gargantuan beast with a singular, large eye. Charybdis, Rimuru thought out loud. Though he had never seen the beast in person, he'd heard enough from Hakuru and Trainee to have a general idea of what the beast looked like. He was also pretty sure that the other beasts were its spawned familiars, the megalodons. Yes, the Calamity-class monster born of the Storm Dragon's magicules, Fry said with a pointed look that made it clear she was aware of his lineage. Charybdis and its megalodons are something of a natural enemy to us harpies. Not only do they excel in aerial combat, but like us harpies, they possess the intrinsic skill magic jamming, making them highly resistant to magic-based attacks. Paired with Charybdis's high regenerative abilities, even physical attacks have minimal effect. On their own, it would be a hard-fought battle with more than its fair share of losses, but I'm sure we harpies would emerge victorious. But Charybdis and its spawn aren't the only enemies we'll be facing this time around. You're referring to the first part of the vision, Rimuru stated, to which Fry nodded her head. Beings with multiple white wings, clad in white and gold, descending from the heavens. Fry repeated with a distressed frown. The only logical conclusion I can reach is the descent of the angels. Even so, the Great Tenma War isn't for at least another decade, and the army of heaven would never work alongside a beast like Charybdis. Rimuru nodded his head in understanding. He could understand why Fry had reached that conclusion. But from where he was sitting, the vision from the Harpy High Priestess had a slightly different, but equally terrifying. Demon Lord Fry, Rimuru called out, pulling the Harpy Queen from her spiraling thoughts. Are you familiar with the heavenly kingdom of Angelus? Fry blinked, the sudden shift in topic catching her slightly off guard. She had expected a somewhat stronger reaction at the mention of angels, not for him to ask about a relatively small nation. Angelus? The small theocracy situated between our borders. Frey's eyes narrowed in thought. I am aware of them, yes. Fulbrosia has no personal or political connection with them, and their zealotry towards angel worship. She paused, refilling her cup and taking another drink before continuing. That said, we do have an existing arrangement. They are permitted to mine and gather resources in the lower regions of my domain. In return, they provide us with half the gold they find and a small portion of ores and minerals too. Why do you ask? Rimuru couldn't help but let out a heavy sigh, his right hand running through his blue-streaked black hair. Given recent events and information I received, I have reason to believe that the angels your priestess saw weren't literal. They weren't the angels of heaven. Frey's eyebrows furrowed in confusion. What do you mean? It means you've let a viper build a nest right under your nose, Rimuru said bluntly. We recently took in a refugee from Angelus, one who was quite close to the nation's leadership. We learned that, as of a few years ago, Angelus had a change in leadership. The ruling figure calls himself Father Angelus, having taken the nation's name as his own. Father Angelus is an otherworlder whose soul was incarnated into a golem crafted from the remains of an archangel. Frey's eyes widened at the revelation, her composure cracking slightly. A body crafted from the remains of an archangel? That shouldn't be possible. Maybe, but that didn't stop Father Angelus from trying to replicate the process, Rimuru said, as Frey's eyes turned to him sharply. From what I've gathered, he has at least 5 more archangel golems, and hundreds of angel golems that he has created. That's most likely the heavenly army your priestess saw, and it's very likely that he used the ores he mined in your domain to create them. Fry gripped her cup tightly, a hairline fracture appearing along the rim under the sudden pressure. The implications of Rimuru's words splashed on her like a bucket of ice-cold water. She had allowed a neighboring nation to gather the resources to turn against her, and all while she was none the wiser. It was embarrassing to admit, more so to have it pointed out by a fellow ruler, but she had been played for a fool. To make matters worse, Charybdis broke out of its seal last night. Its power was taken by one of Father Angelus's subordinates. Rimuru revealed. How is that even possible? We're not too sure ourselves. All we know is that Angelus's subordinate had help from a group of clowns known as the Moderate Harlequin Alliance, and that she was able to suppress Charybdis within her when it tried to take her over. Rimuru explained grimly. I see. Fry muttered with a humorless laugh. She set her cracked cup down on the table as the full weight of her situation came crashing down on her. Father Angelus had managed to amass a large number of artificial angels, and had somehow managed to control the power of a calamity-class monster like Charybdis. If he were to launch a full-scale attack on her nation, then Teresa's vision would surely come to pass, and her people would perish. For the time being, I don't think you have much to worry about. Rimuru spoke up after a minute, his words pulling Frey's attention back to him. From what we've gathered, Father Angelus's ultimate goal is to create an artificial body using the power of a true dragon. Until recently, he'd set his sights on the storm dragon, which was sealed away and being gradually weakened by the hero's seal. But now the storm dragon has vanished and he can't steal its power, Fry said with a pointed look. Rimuru knew there was a question in there, but he didn't feel like talking about it right now. Still, she couldn't believe that Angelus was ambitious enough to think he could steal a true dragon's power and get away with it. Was it even possible to begin with? It was complete madness. Right, and now that he knows of my existence as the storm dragon's heir, he'll likely come for me first, Rimuru said as he leaned back into his seat. He took Charybdis as a means to strengthen his own forces before attacking, but his real target is me. And after that, he'll attack my domain, Fry stated, to which Rimuru nodded his head. As much as I hate to admit it, it makes sense. We share a common enemy, Sky Queen Fry. Based on what you told me, I assume you came to request my aid against the coming crisis, Rimuru stated, to which Fry nodded her head, her eyes meeting his. Then how about we join forces for the battle soon to come? The Heavenly Kingdom is likely to attack us before your nation. If we combine our forces, we can confront them here before he has the chance to attack your domain. In this way, we would be helping each other. Whatever relationship Fulbrosia and Tempest will have can also be discussed after this crisis. Fry closed her eyes. Though she had originally come here to secure an ally against a threat to her domain, if she could prevent her lands from suffering Charybdis's blind destruction, then there was no use debating it. Of course, Fulbrosia will stand by Tempest in the coming battle. After all, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, Fry said, allowing a confident smile to finally grace her features. She leaned forward and stretched out her hand. Rimuru couldn't help the grin that made its way onto his face as he reached across the low wooden table. Then we are in agreement, Demon Lord Fry, Rimuru declared, his eyes locking with hers. Tempest and Fulbrosia will form a temporary military alliance against our foes. Whether that will become something more after this, well, we can discuss that after the dust settles. Fry let out a soft chuckle, the tension that had been weighing down on her shoulders visibly bleeding away. That sounds reasonable. I look forward to that discussion. Rimuru nodded his head in satisfaction before pushing himself up from the velvet couch. He adjusted the cuffs of his coat before speaking once more. Great! Now, my people and I were actually in the middle of a war council, discussing our next course of action after the events of last night. If you're willing, I'd like you to join the discussion. I'm sure your input and experiences will prove invaluable. Fry stood gracefully, her hands sliding over the front of her buxom figure as she smoothed out her leotard. Of course, I'd be honored. It's only natural that we plan our next course of action together. With an agreement struck and newfound mutual respect established, the two rulers turned to leave the private reception room. However, just as Rimuru was reaching for the brass handle of the doors, he heard a heavy creaking sound coming from it, prompting him to pause. Before he could question it further, a sharp, splintering crack echoed through the room. The door, blown off its hinges, fell down in front of Rimuru and Fry with a loud bang and a burst of dust and splintered wood. For a second, total silence reigned in the room as Rimuru's eyes fell upon the three suspects responsible for this crime. Lying in a tangled heap on top of the destroyed door were Tempest's highest guests, and 3 of the 10 great demon lords. At the bottom of the pile, lying flat against the ruined wood, was Dino. The sleeping ruler let out a long sigh, as though the very fact that he'd been caught had drained him of a week's worth of energy. Sitting on his back, sheepishly rubbing the back of her head and looking entirely unapologetic, was Malim. Hovering above the two with a panicked, nervous expression was none other than Ramiris, having managed to catch herself before she could fall with her companions. Oops. Hee. Malim laughed nervously. Malim! Get off me! Dino groaned from underneath her. He already lacked the energy to drag his own weight around. He certainly didn't have the spare to carry Malim too. I told you not to lean on the door, Malim. You'd think you'd know better given how many doors you've broken in this place, Ramiris said as she folded her arms. Ahem. The three of them flinched simultaneously, their heads slowly turning towards an unamused Rimuru standing in front of them with his arms crossed over his chest. Rimuru's eyes bored down on them, his left eye twitching. He took a deep breath to calm himself from the antics of these troublemakers. Care to explain what you three are doing here? Last I checked, you're supposed to be in the labyrinth, Rimuru said with forced patience. Oh, hey there, Rimuru. Fancy seeing you here. He, Malim said nervously as she turned away from Rimuru. I asked you a question, Rimuru repeated, stepping over the splintered remains of the door as he glared down at the three. Before Rimuru could question them further, Fry stepped up beside him. I expected Malim to be here, but I admit I am somewhat surprised to see you here, Ramiris and Dino, she said as her eyes shifted between the two. It's a bit of a long story, Rimuru said as he pinched the bridge of his nose, letting out another exasperated sigh. Malim, seeing her chance, swiftly hopped off Dino's back, earning a pained groan from the man, and landed lightly on her feet. It's not my fault. I sensed Frey's presence and wanted to come say hi since I haven't seen her in a while, Malim said as she crossed her arms in front of her chest, absolving herself of any guilt. Besides, we heard everything. You and Fry are about to fight some strong people, right? Let me fight too. I'll blow them all away with one. No. The rejection was instantaneous, loud, and delivered in perfect synchronization by both Rimuru and Fry. The two rulers paused, blinking as they turned to look at each other. In that moment, a sense of understanding and solidarity passed between them. A knowing smirk tugged at the corner of Rimuru's lips. One Fry returned with an amused smile of her own. I'm glad to see I'm not alone in regards to this matter, Fry said as she folded her arms beneath her bust. Naturally, I'd rather not permanently scar or alter the landscape of my domain, Rimuru responded with an exasperated sigh. Sorry, Malim, but you'll be sitting this one out. If we absolutely need your help, then maybe. Otherwise, I'd rather keep the collateral damage to a minimum. My thoughts exactly, Fry agreed with a solemn nod. Your definition of help usually results in more damage than the actual war would have caused. You two are so mean, Malim said as she pouted, stomping her feet on the ground, though with enough restraint so as to not damage the floorboards. I've been practicing holding back in the labyrinth. I can totally take out a few fish without destroying the forest. Maybe, but the answer is still no, Rimuru said firmly, not budging, causing Malim to sulk. As a new nation, Tempest needs to handle its own problems. If we rely on a powerhouse like you to solve our problems, then neither my people nor I will ever grow stronger. Well, when you put it like that, despite her childish tendencies, Malim understood the value of combat experience. Something that could only be gained by fighting those of equal or greater power than oneself. Even in fights against weaker foes, there was something to be learned. She had sparred with a few of Rimuru's subordinates over the last few weeks, and while they were strong and had impressive abilities, they were still clearly lacking in combat experience. The same could be said for Rimuru himself. The only way they could grow was to fight strong opponents. Fine in knee, Malim groaned, before pointing her right index finger at him. But promise me you'll call me if you guys need my help. I promise, Rimuru said with a smile. He knew that last part came less from a desire to fight, and more from concern for his well-being. You'll be our ultimate secret weapon. Oh, ultimate secret weapon? Malim repeated, perking up as she tested the words on her lips. Wahahaha. That's right, Rimuru. The strongest always waits until the very end. The pink-haired demon lord declared as she puffed out her chest, beating her right hand against it. Meanwhile, from the sidelines, Fry couldn't help but look at Rimuru with newfound respect at the way he had easily managed to handle Malim. It was clear that the two of them had built a strong bond in the few weeks that Malim had been here, something deeper than what Fry herself had with Malim. It was both vexing and relieving at the same time. Frey's relationship with Malim began back when she joined the ranks of the Demon Lords. At the time, Malim had taken an interest in her and often visited her domain uninvited. But given the gap in power between them, Fry had no choice but to tolerate the childish monstrosity. After seeing that Malim, while extremely powerful, was not a malevolent or cunning being, Fry decided to befriend her. If nothing else, having her as an ally would come in handy in the event her people faced a crisis in the future. Though being Malim's friend also proved somewhat stressful, as it meant entertaining her on a regular basis and dealing with the regular destruction of her property. They eventually became close enough that Fry could scold and reprimand. To think he was able to do in mere weeks what took me years, Fry thought as she eyed Rimuru. He was getting more and more interesting the more she interacted with him. Before Fry could comment on it, the air in the room seemed to shift slightly, growing just a bit colder. All eyes turned to Dino, who had slowly pushed himself off the floor and dusted his cloak and attire. His posture was straighter than usual for the sleeping ruler. When Dino turned to Rimuru, Rimuru instantly noticed the change in demeanor. His eyes, usually droopy or closed, were focused with a sharp intensity that instantly put Rimuru on edge. It was a look Rimuru hadn't seen since he and Dino first met in the city of the Forgotten Dragons. Rimuru, Dino spoke, his voice completely devoid of its usual lazy drawl. I want to know if I heard you correctly earlier about the artificial angels. A few seconds of silence passed as Rimuru's eyes met Dino's. There was no point in dodging the subject, and Dino, as a fallen angel, was clearly invested enough to let go of his usual self. Rimuru sighed, something he realized he had done many times now in the last few minutes, before speaking. Neither my people nor I can confirm if it's true, as we haven't actually seen an artificial angel ourselves. Samire was the one who gave us that information. But, given the news Fry brought us, I'm leaning on it being true. I see. Dino's jaw tightened. His hands, hanging loosely at his sides, slowly clenched into fists. He knew who Samire was, of course. Her, Yume, and Rito were frequent visitors of the labyrinth for the sake of their training. And from the sounds of it, Rimuru had long since known about these artificial angels. Dino wanted to ask why Rimuru hadn't told him about it sooner, but he held his tongue. Rimuru didn't owe him anything. If anything, it was the other way around. He had attacked Rimuru on sight the first day they met with the intent to kill, and since then had been crashing at his nation, living a far better life than what he had at Draggle's place. Hovering nearby, Ramiris felt her tinkerer's intuition flare to life. Golems made from angelic remains? Why hadn't she thought of that? As the queen of spirits and a master of spirit engineering, she was beyond fascinated by the very thought of such a work of art existing. Her mouth opened, fully ready to demand Rimuru capture one of those golems intact for study. However, one look at Dino's darkened features made her snap her mouth shut. Ramiris might have been loud, brash, and eccentric, but she wasn't stupid. She had known Dino for many millennia, through several reincarnations, and seeing him this genuinely upset was a rarity she had no desire to test. For once, the pixie wisely decided to keep her thoughts to herself. Rimuru glanced between the three demon lords, noting their varying reactions. He let out a sigh, as he knew there was no point keeping them out of the loop anymore. Look, Rimuru began, as he leveled a stern gaze at the trio. Since you guys already know most of the details Fry and I just discussed, and knowing you three, there's absolutely no way you're just going back to the labyrinth. Malim eagerly shook her head, her twin tails bouncing. Rimuru sighed. You might as well join the war council. Fry raised a questioning eyebrow towards Rimuru. She had some reservations about allowing them to be involved. Yet, looking at the grim determination on Dino's face and the surprisingly convincing attempt at restraint by Malim, Fry figured it couldn't hurt. But, Rimuru continued, his voice hardening as he pointed an authoritative finger at the three of them. You are joining as observers and advisors. That means you sit down, you keep quiet unless you have something productive to add, and you behave. This is a serious matter, with both Tempest and Fulbrosia hinging on it. If you disrupt the meeting, cause a scene, or break anything else. Rimuru paused before delivering his ultimatum. I'll have Shuna take away all of your snack privileges for the foreseeable future. No feasts, no sweets, nothing. Malim gasped in horror, instinctively covering her mouth as though she had just witnessed murder. Why you wouldn't? Try me, Rimuru countered smoothly. Fine. I'll be on my best behavior, Malim said with a confident grin. Why yeah, you won't hear a peep from me either. Ramiris quickly agreed as she crossed her arms in front of her. Rimuru turned towards Dino. The fallen angel didn't offer any words, instead nodding his head in understanding. Rimuru was satisfied with that and nodded back. Okay then, Rimuru said as he clapped his hands in front of him. He then turned towards Fry. Shall we, Demon Lord Fry? Rimuru asked as he gestured down the hall. Of course, but just Fry is fine, Fry replied in amusement as she fell into step beside him. Only if you drop the formalities with me as well, Rimuru countered with a grin. In hindsight, Rimuru should have seen this coming. The air in the council room was heavy with thick tension. Rimuru, seated at the head of the long table, couldn't help but frequently look left and right at the two individuals responsible for the atmosphere currently suffocating the room. On the left side was Fry. As soon as they entered the room, there was a notable shift. After rearranging some seats, Fry wound up on Rimuru's left side, with Malim, Dino, Ramiris, Rito, Samire, and Yum also seated on the same side of the table. Directly opposite Fry was none other than Keed, the Tengu matriarch. Seated with her on the right side of the table were Tempest's highest officers and advisors. The reason for the tension was obvious to anyone who had a basic understanding of the Tengu's history within the forest. For 3 centuries, Fry and her harpies had relentlessly tried to subjugate the Tengu in order to gain a foothold in the Kusha Mountains. It was a bitter, bloody rivalry that had gone on so long due to Fry and Keed being more or less equal in power and skill at the time, with neither one managing to deliver the finishing blow. Now these two matriarchs were mere feet apart, separated only by a polished wooden table. Despite her calm features, Frey's eyes were thoroughly analyzing Keed. She remembered seeing the Tengu matriarch through Clayman's crystal ball, surprised at how weak she had become. The Keed Fry knew would have been able to defeat the Orc Lord without much struggle, and yet at the time she struggled to solo an Orc general. But looking at her now, sensing the power within her, she looked revitalized. While her strength was clearly not what it was the last time they fought, she was clearly doing better than what Fry had seen during the Orc War. It's been a long time, Demon Lord Fry, Keed spoke first, breaking the suffocating silence. Her voice was flawlessly polite but lined with an unmistakable cold edge. Indeed it has, Keed, Fry replied, her own voice smooth as silk. I must admit I was surprised to hear that the Tengu had pledged their allegiance to Tempest. News of your declining health had reached my ears, and your performance in the Orc War confirmed it. But looking at you now, I must say you look positively radiant, even if your current power is a fraction of your former glory. Keed's smile didn't waver, her ember eyes matching the Harpy Queen's in intensity. I suppose being pregnant for 3 centuries was bound to have that effect. Almost all my power was passed on to my daughter, but thanks to Lord Rimuru's blessing, I was able to regain a portion of my strength. But rest assured, my blade is just as sharp as it was the last time we clashed. I see, Fry muttered as she narrowed her eyes slightly. The meaning behind those words wasn't lost on her. The first was that Keed had been pregnant for about as long as Fry had known her, a fact that she had never realized. but it did explain the sudden drop in power. The second thing was Rimuru's ability to restore her. By now, Fry had quickly come to the realization that Rimuru was responsible for naming every monster she had come across thus far, and probably more. Just how much power does he have to give away names so freely? She wondered as she cast a quick glance towards Rimuru before turning back towards Keed. The air in the room grew colder by the second as the two matriarchs glared at one another with chilling smiles. Beside Keed, Hakuru was seated with one eye open, fixed on Fry with lethal intensity, ready to act the moment she made a hostile move towards his wife. "All right, ladies, that's enough." Rimuru's firm voice cut through the heavy tension filling the room, allowing everyone to breathe once more. "I understand that the Tengu and Harpies have prior history and unsettled grudges, but this is neither the time nor place to settle them. I don't expect you to become friends overnight, but as long as the threat of Angelus exists, I can at least expect you to work with each other as allies." "Understood." The two matriarchs remained eye-locked for a moment longer before finally looking away, the tension in the air dispersing into a manageable, albeit professional, atmosphere. All technical terms, skill brackets, and dialogue cues have been formatted cleanly, so the TTS software reads them flawlessly without interrupting the narrative flow. "I'll admit that I came to seek the aid of Tempest partly because of the aerial ability of its troops, the Tengu included. The survival of my people takes precedence over everything else, and for their sake, I'm willing to put aside past hostilities." Fry stated smoothly as she leaned back into her seat, crossing her arms and legs. "The same goes for us as well. The Tengu are now under Lord Rimuru's protection. His allies are ours, and so are his enemies," Keed said as she respectfully dipped her head slightly towards Fry. Despite their past grievances, Keed understood that Frey's current standing was higher than hers, and as such, she should be afforded the proper respect as a fellow ruler aligned with her lord. "Glad to hear it," Rimuru said, his tone bringing the room's focus back to the center of the table. He leaned forward, his eyes sweeping over those assembled around the table. "Now, let's get everyone up to speed." For the next 20 minutes, Rimuru took the floor, detailing the events of the previous night and the information he and Fry had just discussed. He went into detail about the heavenly kingdom of Angelus, their angel golems, and the threat that Charybdis presented. He also explained Father Angelus's plan to steal a true dragon's power for himself, making Rimuru the likely next target. By the time he was finished, another heavy silence filled the room as everyone processed the information and the implications behind it. The sheer scale of the enemy's ambition was staggering. Between the artificial angels, Charybdis's seal being broken, and Angelus's desire to attain godhood, it was all pure madness. Rimuru turned towards Samaire, the young girl seated between Yume and Rito. She looked less than comfortable with being present, yet she didn't attempt to leave. Yume placed a comforting hand on her shoulder, prompting Samaire to respond with a weak but appreciative smile. "Samaire?" Rimuru called out, his voice softening just a fraction to ease the tension in the girl. "I know this isn't an easy time for you, given that Angelus is your father, but anything you can tell us about Angelus, his military, and the artificial angels would be greatly appreciated." "Yeah. Okay. I'll tell you everything I know," Samaire began, taking a deep breath to steady her heart before letting it out. "As you know, the Heavenly Kingdom is a theocracy that worships and reveres angels. Given its location between the Great Forest of Jura, home to various monsters, and Fulbrosia, a demon lord's domain, Angelus already had decent military might long before my father took over, at least enough to defend itself from the occasional monster attack. Demon Lord Frey's Harpies never really bothered with them. Angelus and its people were never really a threat to my people and me. At least, not until Father Angelus took over," Fry said with a shrug. She tried to play it cool, but many could see how irritated she was by the fact that all this had happened right under her nose. Its main army consists of over 5,000 knights, mages, and the like. I'm not too sure of their overall capabilities, but I do know that a minority are capable of elemental magic and spirit summoning, and the most talented and devoted among them are capable of using light magic. Light magic? As in super effective against monsters' light magic? Is it as dangerous as holy magic? Rimuru couldn't help but wonder. While he was confident the ultimate outcome would be the same, Angelus's forces having holy power would significantly increase the risk and potential losses among his own forces. Answer: while they share many visual similarities, the two function under fundamentally different principles. Light magic is a form of elemental magic that generates and manipulates light. It can be used through magicules to bend the laws of nature, or through the power of spirits, though the latter obeys physical laws. Meanwhile, holy magic operates under the principle of faith and uses holy energy to purify magicules, making it lethal to any demonic or magicule-based entity. Depending on its usage, light magic can be dangerous. However, it lacks the same purification properties as holy magic. Therefore, the threat posed to your forces is considerably lower than initially estimated. I see. That's a relief, Rimuru thought as his muscles relaxed slightly. It wasn't that he was underestimating his enemy and their light magic. If they were able to use it to defend their nation for decades, then it was worth being wary of. But holy magic was a whole different game. It put monsters at a disadvantage from the start. Before my father took over, those with an affinity for light magic were often seen as blessed by the angels, being granted a portion of their strength. Samire continued, to which Dino and Keed scoffed simultaneously. Both were former angels, one fallen and the other incarnated. The two had recognized each other almost immediately the first time they encountered one another. Not on a personal level, though. Dino had been able to recognize the light within Keed's soul as that of angelic origin, despite being partially tainted with magicules. And Keed had recognized Dino as one of the 7 original angels created by the Creator. While the two had never spoken personally since Dino arrived in Tempest, that brief understanding had created a small level of kinship between them, one that was now making itself known in the presence of the fake angels. What about the artificial angels? What can you tell us about those? Rimuru asked, all eyes turning back to Samire. Right. As the name implies, they are artificial bodies created from the remains of angels and mineral ores. I only know of 3 types of angel golems so far. The first being the throne angel golem, the body my father incarnated into. It was originally an archangel golem, but evolved into a higher state as my father gained more power and influence. The next is the archangel golem. I only know of 5 of them. They form my father's royal guard, known as the Seraphim Guard. Each of them is quite strong. And lastly are the angel golems. They're the lowest ranking, but their numbers are large. I know of about 200 of them, but I'm confident my father has a lot more than that in his factory. Why do you say that? Rimuru asked, his eyes shifting towards Benimaru, who was writing down everything Samire said. Angel golems became easy to make once father got the process and materials to do so, but the key ingredient is souls. Golems need souls to act as their cores in order to operate autonomously. Otherwise, they are just empty husks that need to be manually controlled. Sumire's voice dropped to a near whisper, her hands trembling as she clenched them tightly in her lap. To further his own experiments, he began to use the people of Angelus to complete the golems, framing it as a divine ascension that would allow them to be closer to the beings they worshipped. But because no normal human soul can handle the strain of hosting a spiritual life form within a material body. Dino cut in, his voice heavy with disgust. Samire nodded her head. Idiot. While it's true that humans have stronger egos than the average spirit, the average human soul simply isn't built to vessel that kind of body. My father came to the same conclusion, but that didn't stop him. Instead, he took his madness further. Samire muttered as a frown marred her young features. He began sacrificing the lives of the people of Angelus, all for a chance at completing a single golem. Of the 200 he currently has, each of them required 3 to 4 human souls fused into one, just to become operational. A heavy silence filled the room as the true monstrosity of their foe was made apparent to all those present. Sacrificing nearly 1,000 lives just for a chance at power was beyond madness. It was the work of a tyrant, a mad king with no regard for the lives of his own people whatsoever. Fry frowned as she listened to Samire. She was beyond troubled by everything she had just heard. She had let these people into her domain, allowed them to mine her resources, and had never bothered to question their presence. All because she didn't view a small human nation as a threat. Now, that ignorance was coming back to bite her tenfold. She may have been a cold and calculating ruler, even to her own children, but she would never disregard their lives carelessly or view them as expendable resources. The fact that Angelus could do so was revolting, and she felt beyond tainted for having associated with such an individual. You mentioned that your father may have more artificial angels. Do you know how many? Keed's voice cut through the morbid silence that filled the room. I don't know, Samire said as she shook her head sideways apologetically. His angel factory was usually off-limits, with very strict clearance. That's fine. You've given us plenty to work with, Samire, Rimuru said with a reassuring nod. Though I do have one more question. Earlier on, prior to Frey's arrival, you reacted to my report on the individual who took Charybdis's power. Would you happen to know who she is? Samire flinched slightly at that, taking a deep breath before speaking. Yes, her name is Sakamori, and like Rito and I, she's an otherworlder. She was summoned by my father to this world and forcefully incarnated into one of the archangel golems. Her incarnation nearly destroyed her soul, as it couldn't handle the strain of the powerful body. But in that moment, she miraculously awakened a unique skill called Awakener. A skill that allowed her spirit to evolve and adapt to her new body, giving her the properties of a spiritual life form, Samire finished. I see, with a skill like that, it's no wonder she was able to contain the power of Charybdis. Hakuru thought out loud as he stroked his beard. With that kind of power, her angelic body, and now Charybdis's power, this girl could prove far more dangerous than Charybdis itself. I plan to deal with Charybdis myself from the start. While this raises the stakes a little, I don't think it will change much overall, Rimuru declared. He could tell more than a few people had their own reservations about allowing him to face Charybdis and Sakamori alone, but none of them seemed surprised by his declaration. It was as if they had been expecting it, which wasn't far from the truth. But Rimuru also had his own reasons for wanting to devour Charybdis. Charybdis was a spawn of his brother's power, a mindless beast born from the storm dragon's magicules. Rimuru felt it was kind of poetic to be the one to put an end to it. Wait! Samire suddenly shouted, prompting all eyes to turn to her. The sudden attention caused her to shrink in on herself a bit, but she pushed forward. I know Charybdis is the enemy, but if possible, could you spare Sakamori? She's not at fault here. My father has her under his control and is forcing her to do all these terrible things against her will. How so? Rimuru asked, his expression remaining perfectly neutral, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of sympathy. My father has two unique skills, Samire started, instantly catching the serious attention of everyone in the room. They all understood the value of skills at that level, which were shaped by the deepest desires of an individual. I don't have a full understanding of them, and I doubt he told me everything, but here's what I know. The first is called Responder. It's a skill that makes a target believe the user's words unconditionally, especially if they lack an answer. It was through this skill that he was able to swiftly gain political power and take over Angelus. The second unique skill is called Guide. It's a skill that allows him to turn the faith of his believers into tangible power. A heavy silence fell over the room once more as everyone processed the sheer scale of those abilities. With abilities like those, it explains how he was able to take over a nation in such a short period of time. Frey reluctantly admitted, and Rimuru could not help but agree. Notice, based on the descriptions provided by the individual Samire, it can be assumed the skills, Responder, and Guide create a self-sustaining feedback loop. By subjugating the minds of those who are ignorant and in doubt, and turning their faith and belief towards him, he gradually gains more power. So he doesn't need to control everyone, just enough to feed the image of his godhood and rapidly gain more followers, Rimuru thought. Rimuru let out a sigh as he leaned forward, his eyes meeting Sumire's and softening slightly, shifting from the gaze of a ruler to something between. I can't make any promises, Samire, Rimuru said, his tone earnest but carrying the weight of a leader who would prioritize his people above all else. If she proves too much of a threat, or trying to save her puts others at risk, then I won't hesitate to put her down. But if there's a window to save her without endangering others, I'll do what I can. Sumire let out a shaky breath, her hands slowly unclenching at her sides. She understood that Sakamori's situation was far from ideal, and asking Rimuru to restrain himself and potentially endanger others would be incredibly selfish of her. So, just knowing there was a chance Sakamori could be saved was more than enough. "Thank you, Rimuru," Sumire said as she bowed her head slightly. "Just knowing you'll try is more than enough." "How touching." Frey's voice suddenly cut through the atmosphere, bringing all eyes to her. Her tone was slightly sarcastic, but not offendingly so. She didn't approve of Rimuru granting mercy to an opponent, regardless of their circumstances. It was a weakness that could easily cost them on the battlefield, and seeing as they were in this together, it could also affect her people. But Frey also knew she couldn't force him to do otherwise. They had just barely managed to secure a temporary military alliance with Tempest. Debating morals and ethics prior to a war would only lead to internal conflict. "If you're going to deal with Charybdis, then I suppose that means Angelus is mine?" Frey asked, but from the look in her eyes, Rimuru could tell it was more of a statement than a question. "Do you think you can win?" Rimuru asked. He wasn't looking down on Frey or anything. In fact, there was a decent chance she was stronger than him. But in light of what Sumire had revealed about his physiology and abilities, he felt he should at least ask. "Don't underestimate me, Rimuru," Frey responded with a confident grin. "I didn't earn my seat on the Demon Lord Council by just sitting pretty in my nest. Besides, Father Angelus is simply a human who has had a taste of power. There's no way I'd lose to such a person within the skies. If that's the case, then I'll leave Father Angelus to you, Demon Lord Frey," Rimuru said with a nod. He still had some reservations, especially in regards to Frey's confidence, but he felt speaking further would potentially offend her. Frey was the Sky Queen. In an aerial battle, there was no doubt she would have a massive advantage due to her strength, speed, and experience. The only question going through Rimuru's mind, though, will it be enough? "Of course," Frey said with a firm nod, before turning her head towards Sumire, causing the teen girl to flinch at Frey's piercing gaze. "That said, I have no intention of showing Angelus any mercy. While I'm grateful for the information you shared, we wouldn't be in this mess if not for Angelus's greed and lust for power. My own people could have been brought to ruin, and I have no intention of letting such a threat live on." Sumire gulped, nodding her head slightly at Frey. She understood where Frey was coming from. She had expected something similar from Rimuru as well, but the reality of it was chillingly terrifying. Sumire had known that one day her father's actions would catch up to him. She had long since prepared herself for her father's death. She had long— "Vesta," Rimuru called out, cutting through the tense silence building up. He would have to speak to Sumire later on. The former Prime Minister stood up, giving a respectful bow to those present before speaking. "I've spoken to King Gazel and filled him in on recent events and the information we had regarding the Heavenly Kingdom. While he regrets not being able to come personally, he has sent 150 Pegasus Knights to aid us in the battle to come. I didn't think he would send almost half his elite unit," Rimuru thought with a smile. He would have to find a way to make this up to his senior disciple. "I'll be sure to give him my thanks. The Pegasus Knights will boost our aerial forces greatly." With a nod, Vesta took his seat. "With that said, I think we've discussed everything we can regarding the enemy we face and the forces we have at hand," Rimuru spoke up. With the snap of his fingers, a map appeared in the middle of the long table, unrolling to reveal a layout of the great forest of Jura and its immediate neighbors. "Now, let's talk strategy." The hours blurred together, bleeding the bright afternoon sun into the purples of the early twilight. Maps were drawn and redrawn, wooden markers denoting troop placements, interception zones, and magic artillery lines. Strategies were debated and refined. Benimaru, Hakuru, and Geld laid out the ground strategies while Keed, Frey, and surprisingly Gabaru laid out the— Through it all, Rimuru guided the meeting with a calm, decisive authority. He listened to the input of all those present, adjusting tactics where necessary, ensuring everyone could play to their strengths efficiently. By the time the final contingencies had been set, the sun had already begun to sink over the horizon. It had been decided that since Rimuru and Fry would be facing the biggest targets of the opposing forces, command of the combined military forces would be given to Benimaru. Acting as his aides would be one of Frey's daughters, Claire and Trya the Dryad. This would allow Benimaru to have situational awareness of both the air and the ground and adapt according to the situation. "Then that covers everything," Rimuru said, breaking the tired silence that filled the room. He stood up, rolling his shoulders to work out the stiffness. "We start mobilizing tomorrow at first light. Ensure your forces are rested, equipped, and briefed. Dismissed." A chorus of resolute affirmations echoed through the room. One by one, the commanders, officers, advisors, and guests filed out of the room, their faces etched with grim determination. Shuna lingered for a moment, her gaze meeting Rimuru's, before she nodded and followed Keed and Hakuru out. With that, the expansive council room was left empty, save for the two individuals remaining within. Rimuru let out a long sigh as he plopped back into his chair. Opening a single eye, he looked to his left to see Fry. "You look tired, Rimuru," Fry said as she leaned forward slightly. "Just mentally drained," Rimuru said as he sat up. "This is the first time I've been in this situation. Leading a war, that is." He had fought his fair share of battles in his past life and had been in charge of teams and squads. But taking an entire nation to war was a very different ball game. "But I guess that's something you're pretty accustomed to, given your reputation," Rimuru added with a smile. "I am," Fry agreed confidently. "Though I must admit, the way you conduct your affairs is intriguing." Rimuru raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms. "Intriguing? Or strange by Demon Lord standards?" "Perhaps a bit of both," Fry said as an amused smile tugged at her lips. She stood up, slowly approaching the map spread across the table, her left hand running across its surface. "In Fulbrosia, and indeed most Demon Lord domains, there is a rather strict and clear hierarchy. Power dictates the flow of conversation. The strong speak and the weak listen. In most cases, a ruler's duty is to cull the weak so the strong may thrive." She gestured towards the now empty chairs around the table where just moments ago, beings of various races had been sitting. "Yet here, you allow lesser monsters and even humans to voice their opinions. You listen to them and adjust your strategies to accommodate them, almost treating them as equals rather than the weaklings they actually are. It's a level of indulgence rarely seen in beings of our caliber." "I won't deny that it's a luxury," Rimuru admitted calmly. "One that I can afford because of my strength. If I were weak, my words would be empty, and my people would have no reason to follow me." Rimuru stood up, walking over to the windows and gazing out at the city he and his people had built. "But I'm not weak," Rimuru said, glancing sideways at Fry. "And because I have that strength, I don't need to rule through fear alone. The foundation of every nation is its people. As long as they feel their voices are heard and that their lives are valued, then they'll fight and work 10 times harder than any slave. In this way, their loyalty can't be broken by mere intimidation or a stronger opponent." Fry hummed thoughtfully as she stepped up beside him, watching as the evening lights began to illuminate the stone-paved roads of the city. "It's not the worst form of leadership I've seen, though it can be a little naive. Certainly not a method I would ever adopt myself." Rimuru raised an eyebrow, his lips twitching upwards. "Not your style." "Hardly," Fry responded with an amused scoff. "While I care for my people and will do anything to ensure their survival, as any decent ruler should, I can't afford to show them the same leniency you do your people. For harpies, it's not uncommon for sisters to kill each other, especially when it comes to the line of succession. I had to kill my own mother, the former harpy queen, since my sister was cast out in infancy." "Sounds brutal," Rimuru commented, not quite sure how to respond to that revelation. "I suppose many races have their own way of doing things. Even here, it's no different. My goal is to build a nation that is welcoming to all races, but that's far easier said than done. Different races have different traditions, customs, and overall needs. Finding a way to balance it all without oppressing one race is the most. Rimuru then turned towards Fry with a confident grin. But somehow, I get the feeling that everything will work out. So far, my people have repaid my trust tenfold, and I'm doing my best to live up to the faith they've put in me. Just looking at what they've accomplished makes me hopeful for the future. You're a very idealistic, Rimuru. Not at all what I expected when I came to meet the Storm Dragon's heir, Fry remarked. She leaned forward onto the window frame, the warm glow of the city lights reflecting in her eyes. You aren't the first person to tell me that, and I doubt you'll be the last, Rimuru said with a casual shrug. A comfortable silence fell between the two rulers as they gazed into the nightlife of the city. Starting tomorrow, they would be preparing for a war, but at this moment, they were content to just enjoy the calm and bustling of the city below. Well, since we're both taking a brief respite before the war preparations demand our full attention, why don't I show you around town? Rimuru said as he turned fully towards the Sky Queen. Fry paused, her eyes widening slightly at the casual invitation. She eyed Rimuru for a moment, her gaze sweeping over his relaxed posture, searching for any hidden motive. Finding none, she let out a soft, genuine chuckle. A tour of a monster city from the ruler himself? Fry mused as she straightened up. I suppose a little distraction wouldn't hurt. Great, right this way? Rimuru smiled, gesturing towards the door. Leaving the heavy burdens of leadership and impending war behind in the council room, the two rulers walked out side by side, stepping out into the vibrant, lively streets of the Rimuru Tempest Federation.